I'm a certified personal trainer, an Integrative Nutrition Health Coach, and I'm halfway through my master's degree in social work. But today, especially as an almost therapist, I have a lot of different views and beliefs than I did growing up. Because as a kid, I was the strong one. So keeping it together, even and especially when everything around me was falling apart, that was my power, my ability. My strength as a kid was responding to pain with, it's fine, I'm fine, I can handle it, I don't need help. So even when I was forced to go to therapy as a teenager, I was resentful because I didn't understand what talking about anything was supposed to do for me. It is what it is. I was adamant that my stress and my emotions had no connection at all whatsoever to the fact that I was over 300 pounds at 17 years old and had been morbidly obese my whole life. I was a very left brain kind of person, meaning if I didn't see it or if I didn't have evidence of it, then I didn't believe in it. So I didn't think that my feelings really mattered or that my emotions really had anything to do with anything. I believed in willpower. So I applied that same mentality to my weight loss. It didn't matter how I felt about it. I didn't want to go on a diet to begin with. So my plan for weight loss was pretty much to just power through it like I did everything else and just get it over with as fast as possible. But what I learned along the way is that this mind-body connection is not just a crazy idea made up by some spiritual guru. And I believe that everyone, but especially those who struggle with their weight, deserve to understand how this really works. So, when we eat food, our brain releases the neurotransmitters called dopamine and serotonin. These two, combined with oxytocin and endorphins, are what chemists refer to as the happiness cocktail, because they activate what's called the mesolimbic, or reward pathway in our brain. So because human beings survive on food, we are biologically designed to not only feel happy and rewarded when we eat it, but also to seek out a source of serotonin when our cortisol is too high. Because food influences our brain chemistry just like every other addictive substance or pleasurable activity. And our brain is always striving for an equilibrium between stress and stress relief. The real question is not, how do I stop eating? The real question is, why am I eating in the first place? Whoops, do you see that? Why am I eating in the first place? Why is my cortisol so high? What is the source of that stress? What is the pain that I feel I need to numb? What am I starving for emotionally that I'm filling with food physically? What is the cause to this effect? So, yes, because if the biggest problem that you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, that's not a problem that you have with food. That's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. And again, my left brain was satisfied because there was actual statistical proof that the more adverse childhood experiences someone encounters growing up, so a parent dying, being imprisoned, mental illness, abuse, neglect, etc., the higher their risk of health issues later in life. And so this was groundbreaking in the field of addiction because it started to answer the question, well, why is it that most people who try most drugs are not addicted to them? And it proves that we have to stop questioning the willpower of this adult and look at where they came from. And what was happening in their immediate environment when their brain was neurobiologically developing. What source of happy chemicals were they conditioned to seek out at 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years old? Because it's not a question of what's wrong with this person. It's a question of what happened to them. And their behavior is not a problem, it's a solution. And so this was groundbreaking for me personally because it was proven on paper. Obesity works the same way. It wasn't a lack of willpower every time I failed at Weight Watchers or another dietitian or another nutritionist. It's that there was death, loss, trauma, grieving, depression, mental illness in my immediate environment, And when I was 5 years old, my two primary caregivers were mourning the loss of a child. It's not that I had no willpower. I just didn't have drugs, alcohol, gambling, and cigarettes when I had to be strong as a kid. But I did have to eat food every day. So, understanding all of this now, I know my weight loss story a little bit different than I did as it was happening. Because I knew I was losing weight during my sophomore year of college, but that's because I was away from my stressors, not eating my feelings, and I finally felt safe, happy, and supported elsewhere. Physically, I was on a diet, but psychologically, I had created a new reward system. Because every time I had a salad with no dressing, and I skipped dessert, and I ate under 1,000 calories a day, it was reward. I was doing something right. I was being good. So every indication of being smaller, comments from other people, trying on clothes, looking in the mirror, seeing my own body, were all reminders that I was becoming better, more worthy, more lovable. And now weight loss, the praise and joy, serotonin, associated with rapid weight loss, replaced the shame and fear, cortisol, of continuous weight gain. And now, dieting, not eating, was the thing that made me feel good. So on the surface, it looked like I was invested in my weight loss. In reality, I had an addiction to it. So after 1 year of extreme dieting, a nutritionist explained to me that I had hit starvation mode because my body was now fighting me to keep the weight on. I'll never forget hearing that. I was so shocked, me starving. But I was just following the rules. My goal was weight loss. My prescription from everyone always was to eat less, exercise more. But she explained to me that I had eaten too little and exercised too much, and that all the doctors I went to visit had no answers for me because losing my period and losing my hair, not being able to sleep or poop, being freezing all the time, dizzy, nauseous, those were symptoms of daily starvation, not sickness. But it came naturally for me to just pretend I wasn't hungry or dizzy, nauseous, tired, anxious, stressed, unhappy, and unhealthy, because I spent my whole life pretending I didn't feel things I didn't want to feel. But now, I was focusing all my attention on the things that I knew cognitively. No seconds, no snacks, no dessert, no dressing. The fewer the calories, the better. No days off. I thought suffering was just the price that I had to pay for having been so overweight. So thankfully, again, for my left brain, this is a known phenomenon called addiction transfer. If you type this into Google, the first two things you see are after bariatric surgery and after gastric bypass surgery. Because, like every diet, we can address the physical manifestations of an addiction to food and dieting, but without addressing the psychological reasons that behavior pattern exists in the first place, you will have to fight to keep it off. Because we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. Yeah. So, the real transformation for me began when I had to eat more and exercise less. Because now, instead of using food to numb my feelings and dieting to distract me from them, I had to actually feel them. So my therapist likes to say that the floodgates were opened because I was feeling everything all the time. Watching the news made me cry because I finally felt sad, fear, helpless. Rolling around in bed, I couldn't sleep all of a sudden because I had all this anxiety. Being one-on-one with someone was scary. Getting attention on the street made me feel exposed. And the fact that I lived in a world that now treated me like a different person didn't make me excited, it made me depressed. And despite everything I argued growing up, my therapist was right all along. Life was so much harder without a shield of protection. And I missed being 300 pounds when I didn't have to feel pain and vulnerability. So my intention at this point is to recover from an eating disorder. But every time I tried to be a little less restrictive around food, I was just out of control, eating too much. And I found myself ping-ponging back and forth between restriction and binging, growing gradually more terrified of waking up at 300 pounds again. But rather than admit I was losing control, I started doing a lot of research, left brain. And I already knew how to lose weight, right? So it allowed me to see past the endless amount of very tempting answers provided by the $64 billion diet industry, such as studies proving Jenny Craig is the most effective, funded by Jenny Craig. My research targeted weight maintenance. How are people keeping it off? Because we all know how to lose weight, right? We've done it. We've all done it. The question is, how do we lose weight forever? And so, reading further into, okay, why don't we know about maintenance, right? 95 to 98% of people who lose weight on a diet gain it back plus some. So, reading further into the successful weight loss, such as The Biggest Loser, half their size issues of magazines, Weight Watchers, instead of being captivated and impressed by the weight loss, I was asking, yeah, but then what? And what I found is that the binge after restriction is a protective response mechanism against starvation mode, which is exactly what I was experiencing. And it was biologically wired into my design as a human being, not something I did out of willpower. But before I could fully accept that this was out of my hands, I wanted to know about the 2 to 5% of people that do maintain their weight. What are they doing? So I found the National Weight Control Registry. And this surveys people who have lost and maintained 30 or more pounds. And what they have in common, largely, you can find this on their website, is a low-calorie, low-fat diet, daily exercise, and they weigh themselves often. And so I looked at that, and I saw the list of eating disorder tendencies I was instructed to move away from. And so what I concluded is actually pretty intuitive. The only way for weight loss to be maintained is if the means through which it's achieved are sustainable. It's not that diets don't work. They do. It's that diets can't end. The research suggests that if we can commit to stay on a diet forever, maybe we can maintain what we lose, but I didn't have that option. My weight loss was so rapid and so extreme that I had to recover now physically from starvation and psychologically from addiction. So the first time I heard John speak, I heard him say diets don't work. And I thought, well, clearly this man doesn't know what he's talking about because I just lost 150 pounds on a diet. Of course they work. But now, throughout this year or so of data collection, every diet I used to keep the weight down resulted in uncontrollable weight gain. So I now, Miss Willpower, am uncontrollably losing 10, gaining 15, losing 10, gaining 15, freaking out. And this story sounded all too familiar. So I start exploring the Gabriel method. I buy John's books. And suddenly he is the only person in everything that I've found that can explain every single thing that's happening to me inside and out and why. So I start practicing this mind-body approach, not because I knew it would work, but just because I knew what wouldn't work. I knew every time I lost weight, I would gain it. So I really didn't know what else to do. So instead of using all my willpower to count calories and portion meals and do cardio, I was now forcing myself to meditate every day and visualize every night. Try some breathing exercises, write, practice gratitude, go to yoga, go to therapy, stay off the scale, and not get distracted by immediate weight loss by staying focused on long-term health. The transition was not effortless at all, but the biggest challenge wasn't controlling my body around food. It was rewiring my brain around food. The challenge, the hardest part, was shifting my priorities from restricting the bad to adding in the good, from the quantity to the quality of food that I ate, and from what I weighed to how I felt. Ignoring my feelings didn't work. I knew now that every time I pretended not to be hungry, I would binge later on. If I forced myself onto the treadmill, it was forcing me into the kitchen at night. It didn't work this way. So I became determined to figure out how to listen to my body. How exactly does this work? And so I remember Heather at my first Omega did a little bit of a longer version of hand on your heart, hand on your stomach. And she's prompting us to, close your eyes and feel, what does yes feel like, and what does no feel like? What does your body want? What does it reject? And I was sitting in the back, my eyes are closed, and I'm trying. I just look around the room like, what is she talking about? Like, you can't feel stuff in your body? Like, if I were gonna feel something, like, what would it be? I had no idea. There was zero connection at all between mind and body. I always just did what I was told to do around food. Eat less, eat more. Like everything else, it didn't matter how I felt about it. I just did what I had to do. But now, actively fighting every urge, temptation, and instinct to diet was, ironically, the only thing that kept my weight off. And despite all my fear, doubt, and skepticism, the less I focused on my body, weight, and size, the more effortless my weight maintenance became. Because instead of using food and dieting as coping mechanisms to deal with stress and emotion, these mind-body techniques became my new source of stress relief. I was still getting my happy chemicals, just from healthier sources. So I tolerated the difficulty of daily meditations, the discomfort of going to yoga instead of the gym, and the fear of seeing my bathroom scale and not stepping on it. Because now I knew it had been proven to me by me that my body was the effect, not the cause, of my mental and emotional health, and that if I feel my feelings, I don't eat them. Take all the pictures you want of that. Thank you. So I realized that weight maintenance wasn't a question of controlling my body and balancing calories forever. It was about listening to my body and really balancing my emotions, how I felt. And it wasn't that I couldn't hear my body, it was that I wasn't listening to it. Every time it said rest, I said no, I have to go to the gym. Every time it said eat, I said no, I'm on a diet. But now my goal was to obey. Instead of denying hunger, I ate. Instead of denying exhaustion, I took a break. And over time, as meditation became relaxing and yoga became enjoyable and the scale became laughable, okay, my mind-body connection came back to life. And so all of a sudden, one night, I was lying in bed, cuddling with my boyfriend, and I almost jumped out of bed. I was so excited. I was like, Adam, I totally get it now. Now I understand, like, it's in my body. I get it. And he was like, what are you talking about? I was feeling what some left-brainers might call chemical soup in your brain manifest as warmth in my chest. Love. And the more I challenged myself to pay attention to what I was feeling, the more I noticed my shoulders are up when I'm stressed, my jaw is clenched when I'm angry, my feet are tapping when I'm anxious, I hold my breath when I'm rushing or multitasking. And I actually began to feel fear, sadness, anxiety, because I wasn't using anything to stuff them down. Gradually, what I knew, cognitively, it's time to eat. I'm not allowed to have that. That's too much. I have to work out, be strong, self-control, willpower, became overpowered by how I felt intuitively. I'm hungry. I'm full. I'm too tired to work out. I'm so stressed I have to work out. I need help. I can't. I love you. So 6 months ago, on February 2nd, my dad died. And instead of pretending that I was okay, there was a weight on my chest, and there was tightness in my back, and a pit in my stomach, and fatigue all over my body, and pain so debilitating it felt fatal. Because instead of knowing it, I was feeling it. So I think a lot of us here have said this. If I didn't know what I know now, I would be well on my way to 300 pounds again. But what I know now is that your emotions can't kill you. But if you turn to food for safety, numbing, comfort, support, love, connection, friendship, power, pleasure, reward, etc., it can make you gain weight. So one of the most powerful moments I had interning with Dr. Patricia in California was seeing what happened when she explained to her 8-year-old patient there might be a connection between her overeating late at night and the fact that she's being bullied in school. Because, simply put, sometimes when we feel sad, eating can make us feel better. No blame, no shame, it wasn't her fault. There was nothing wrong with her. No one can be happy all the time, right? So she nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. It's so intuitive. And I thought back to my 8-year-old self and the overwhelming amount of shame, guilt, fear, anxiety I carry to the pediatrician every year. I know I'm a failure. Can we just get this over with? Dr. Patricia and her patient talked about other ways that she can make herself feel better, who she can talk to when she needs it, how to express her feelings. And I thought back to all the dieting advice, the obesity lectures I received every year like clockwork, the dietitian referrals, the doctor's note I needed to join Weight Watchers, the pain of feeling perpetually inadequate, and the torture of pretending none of it really mattered to me at all. I thought about how early and how often I was taught to believe that it was my fault. So the amazing thing about this method is that it's not about learning what, when, how, where to do anything. It's about unlearning. This is not about getting all the best information from all the most credible sources. This is about listening to your 8-year-old, the part of you that knows this is not your fault. There is nothing wrong with you. This is about listening to the part of you that hasn't yet been taught that your behavior is pathological, that vulnerability is weakness, and your body is just what you get for being so lazy. This is about who you would be if no one ever told you just get over it and move on, or eat less and exercise more. This is, to me, about calling a friend when you feel alone, crying when you feel sad, screaming when you are angry, admitting you're anxious when everything is out of your hands, and never, ever letting yourself say, it's fine, I'm fine, I can handle it, it is what it is. Because this is not about becoming the person you want to be. This is about being the person you already are.